SEEDS, the Society for Ethical Egg Donation and Surrogacy, has also had standards over the years that they've put together, and they've been working on it off and on for a number of years, but now the work of that team has gotten very intense, and we've officially put out some suggested standards. We've been working on this as a standards committee for a number of months now, and it's out now for public comment within the SEEDS organization and to other organizations. And once we get all the feedback sort of assimilated, we may tweak or add to or do some other work with those standards, and then those become the official standards that would be governing all agency members of SEEDS. So that's the idea. And the idea is to create ethical standards and best practice standards for agencies in the field.
So would you like to give a couple of examples? For instance, people were talking here about such competition between agencies during which one agency approaches surrogate that's already have a relationship with another agency and creates a dynamic of some called poaching, etc. And multiple surrogacy journeys. Can you give us examples of what those standards might attempt to change?
Some of the standards that have been created directly relate to the participants, the surrogates, the egg donors, and the parents, and some of the standards directly relate to agencies within the field and how agencies should be working together and not poaching clients from other agencies, etc. So some of the areas we've touched on are in advertising and recruiting for surrogates and donors. And one of those subsections, we basically said no agency shall intentionally interfere with any ongoing relationship of another agency and that agency's participants. And the participants are the surrogates, the donors, and the parents. So that's something that actually came up on a listserv conversation this year as a very hot topic, so we decided we had to include it as one of the many standards that we created.
Rich, did you ever think, just as an aside, you talked about plastic surgeons. The American College of Plastic Surgery has a division where the only way you can actually belong to that particular division is if you do not advertise your services. Not on social media, not on print, anything like that. Well, do you think our community, would you consider that, for example, where none of us advertise?
Well, there's something similar within the legal profession that attorneys are not allowed to solicit the client. Right. You can't go out and say, they're in an interview, here's my card, I'll take care of you. You can't do that. You have to have them referred to you.
Right.
It might be worth talking about, but the agencies are promoting themselves online.
Right.
Parents are getting online to find them.
Yeah.
And in that, they are advertising.
Right.
Well, and the part that my red flags start going up when Rich says, being referred to an agency might be better than being advertised to, then that starts my wheels turning about kickbacks from clinics to agencies, which I think is ludicrous, but it happens. And I think there's going to be a double-edged sword no matter what you do.
Sure. Well, these are ethical standards, and ethics can get into gray areas sometimes. We do have another rule within the list of standards that says that agencies should disclose any conflicts of interest that exist in the work that they're doing with that client, whether it's the surrogate, the donor, or the parent. And there are lots of conflicts of interest in this business. Doctors refer to lawyers, lawyers refer to doctors, to agencies, and back and forth. So.
Right.
Steve.
I just want to ask Terry, so what do you think about, did your agency pay referral fees to your surrogates to refer other women to you?
Yes.
And what if the surrogate says, I want to go out and start referring women to you? Isn't that a kickback of a sort?
I feel like that's a little different. I feel like they've gone through, we have what was called our Surrogate Ambassadors Group, which they've completed a journey with us, and then they decide that they want to come back and educate other women about how our agency works, and then we would do referral fees. I feel that's really different from a clinic possibly just meeting an agency saying, cool, we like you, we want to start getting a lot of these people through the door, let's just start saying that we like you and you give us, or we'll give you $5,000 for every person we send to your door. We've spent usually a minimum of 2 years with these surrogates, and we have an intimate relationship. And so I don't know, perhaps on its face, similar, but in practice, completely different, in my opinion, from how it actually happens in the world.
And I'm not criticizing it, because my agency pays referral fees too. It's
Sure.
just, it's a slippery slope, and it's hard to move the
is.
boundary to know where you're getting referrals from and whether it's an intermediary, et cetera. So it's very hard to manage.
I think the problem of referrals that Carrie was talking about is when there is some sort of adverse, incentive here. So we, for instance, as Managing Babies, think that there are too many cases in which the representative of the surrogate, the legal representative of the surrogate, is somebody that was suggested by the representatives of the intended parents. So the intended parents come to an agency. Many times the agency has either their own in-house lawyer or have lawyers working with them. And then they say, okay, here's a surrogate, but the surrogate needs to have her own representative too. And the surrogate says, I don't know any lawyers. They say, okay, we'll find you a lawyer. And then there might not be a kickback, but there's a kickback in kind, potentially, that lawyer knows that if he's going to cause too much trouble during negotiations, he's not going to be referred to again. That's at least the theory of why this could be a potential problem if all the representatives of the surrogates come from the representatives of the intended parents. I know every agency says, I'll never do that, but it's a possibility.
From a clinic perspective, I think from a medical practice perspective, we do advertise on social media as our, in terms of our center, but I would be very comfortable. I think there's an inherent discomfort that I have with advertising as a physician, because as a doctor, you need to be referred to as because of your good work or your goodwill and the work that you've done. So I think I would be fine with banning advertising for physicians, frankly, especially in this particular space. And the other thing is that I think if clinics have investments in whether it's agencies, whether in other entities, and they're referring, it's actually within our guidelines, the American Medical Association, that you have to divulge that information to your intended parents if you have a particular investment.
Go ahead, Steve, and then we'll move to
And I just wanted to
subtopic.
supplement Rich's comments about the seed standards, because one of the standards that I happened to draft originally is about marketing, and one of the targets isn't to ban advertising, but to say that profit or fees or income or whatever that economic incentive is cannot be the leading or primary topic of an advertisement. You have to be advertising based on altruism or other issues. So you can, if you can't ban it, you can mold
when you're
it.
recruiting surrogates.
Right.
I want to make a comment about the limitation on what's going on here.
Okay.
One, SEEDS does not have in its membership all surrogate parenting agencies, and some of the larger ones have refused to be a part of it. And it's very concerning to me if you don't have licensing requirements in every state, and SEEDS doesn't become some federally authorized standard, and people don't belong to it, then what impact is going to have? And until we have a fully established grievance procedure that's actually effective, that actually says if you violate these standards, you're thrown out, and then it's like you don't have a good rating anymore, someone isn't going to follow you, then really we've only just begun with the standards. I'm not saying we don't have to begin, and that's where we begin, of course, but it's like a model act. A model act became the rule for almost every professional responsibility statute in the country, and ultimately was followed, but it took, 30 years to get there? And surrogacy is only about 42 years old as it is. I know we're just starting today, and it's part of why I want to be involved, but there are many steps along that path, and part of it is convincing people that there is an entity out there that really cares. Not going so far, because I've seen other agencies literally advertise for circle surrogacy to get the benefit of our name. It is something which, if you go too far and stymie growth, you're going to lose the potential to get those agencies to join SEEDS, which is the most important piece. The second most important piece is to then have a strong grievance process that says, the moment we hear that you've stolen a surrogate from this place, we're going to have a grievance set up, and we're going to have testimony and decisions made.
But I
30 years
agree we
is way
have to
too long
control
because
the advertising, because there was a video advertisement on Facebook that showed a donor counting out $100 bills
Yeah,
for her fee onto a couch and saying, you can make this money. That is
Yeah.
not the kind of advertisement
That
that
should
you
be
see.
banned.
And let us actually put it in another context. People have different levels of, sensitivity to ethics and different views about ethics. But regardless of your views, and regardless of how much you're intrinsically, bothered by hearing such things, we all know that the shoe's going to drop, and there's going to be legislators and news articles. And I remember when things were happening with all these potentially multiple surrogates working for one intended parents, I don't even think it was true. We said it's going to get out, and there's going to be legislation, there's going to be bans, there's going to be backlashes. And I think so. Even if you're not intrinsically, convinced that this is something we should deal with, you should understand that it will eventually come back to haunt us if such bad, actors are allowed to advertise like this or pose like the way that was described before. But John, go ahead.
I agree that poaching is not cool, but this thing about banning this and banning that, I mean, we live in America.
No, I meant that those bans are going to come unless we come.
No, it's like people can advertise if they're ethical and you don't like people putting money on the couch. Okay, don't follow that ad. Don't pay attention to it. Go to someone who's going to say, we're going to take care of you. But this thing about, we don't live in China where we can tell people what to say and not say. And the other thing is, now I lost my train of thought, but it's the free market. I mean, every single one of us here who's part of the surrogacy agency knows that the parents come to us, and it's very good that they do, and they say, I'm shopping for an agency. And that's fine. They should be doing that. They should be gathering information, and they should be talking to professionals, and they should be choosing on a gut reaction, not because all the agencies here are good ones. And I always say that. They say, oh, we're looking at Circle and we're looking at you. I'm like, you'll be in good hands with Circle, and you'll be in good hands with me. You just need to go where you feel the best. But you can't take away the free market.
But I'll give you an example.
You can't take away the free market.
I don't think the seeds standards, even as they're proposed right now, have a clause about bad taste. Not yet. But they do have a clause about the fact that you can't be misleading and say $60,000 when you're also counting reimbursements and bed rest and all these things. So there needs to be, I guess what we're saying is that there are things that are happening right now, in part because there isn't even an attempt for self-regulation. There isn't even an attempt by the professional community to self-regulate, let alone regulation from legislation. And John, I want to go back to...
licensing is good, but New York licensing is good.
Okay, so
It's a
let's
very
talk about
onerous
that.
process. It's a very good process, but they didn't ask us to submit our ads. They're not telling us how to advertise.
I understand, but you need to,
advertise.
I guess let's get to that then. So New York is the latest state to allow compensated surrogacy legally, finally. And there were a lot of us who provided input for this process, and we're all, very relieved that it was finished. But it's and I heard from you, Vika, I've heard from Amelia and others about how rigorous the process is to become licensed in New York. And you, John, said before that you think that regardless of what might be, onerous to agencies, you think that is a completely different level of, potential to regulation than self-regulation. Can you try to give examples what you think would be possible?
It doesn't make any difference what guidelines SEEDS establishes. It doesn't make any difference what ABA establishes. As Rich rightly stated, nobody has to follow anything until you have a licensing procedure and then a set of civil servants who actually pursue it. The the lawyers, as everybody knows, are regularly violating all kinds of rules about what they're not supposed to do. And the number of times you actually actually see someone from the Board of Bar Receivers go after you and say, oh, you did blah, 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 is never happening. So we've got lots of big problems going on. There are many, many steps down the road to doing it. But in fact, it's the lawsuits that really actually help establish the standards. And the truth of the matter is that one of the lawsuits that's come out so far is this lawsuit that says that donors are having to pay taxes. Well, let me tell you something. If a donor is providing a service, which is a really short form service, and something's coming out of her, boy, is a surrogate ever filing a service.
Really,
and so I think we're getting down a way where money's going to become a bigger issue. So I'm just telling you that from my perspective, you are absolutely right to focus on standards. But it's just the first step in a long set of steps, because nothing's going to have any meaning until A, agencies join, there's grievance procedures, states enact laws. No, I agree with you, New York is really strict, really harsh, and it's going to be hard. A lot of people are saying, I don't want to find a New York circuit. It's too difficult. The requirements are too hard. It's going to be too costly for people. I don't want to do it. But there can be a way to create licenses that make sense, that have ethical standards, that have grievance procedures, whether it be federally or from a state perspective, to say that surrogate agencies should be like lawyers, like social workers, like psychologists, like doctors, that have to be licensed, and they're overseen by a body that exists. And whatever that body is should be in existence so that we can be secure, the parents can be secure,
And I think
the kids.
you attorneys have to lead the charge, and it can't take 30 years, because by that time I'll be 65.
30 years?
I think attorneys
You are not a mathematician.
If I can take a little bit
Steve's
of
already, that's false advertising, by the way.
I just wanted to
Okay, there will be drinks, but in 15 minutes, so,
Ron, really quick. The ABA Model Act, there's a Model Act governing agencies. There's a Model Act governing ART as a whole. That started years ago. It didn't get passed until 2008, and then it was updated in 2019. But some of the stuff we've seen in the Model Act has been repeated, and we've seen it in the Uniform Parentage Act, and all the newer surrogacy statutes that are coming into play now in other states now model this. So it starts there at least, and so we've now started with at least the Model Act governing agencies. SEED standards will be one of those foundational blocks as well, and the New York licensing structure will be a start as well. Whether you like it or don't, it's a starting point. And we'll get there, but it's going to take a while. But maybe 15 years.
45.
yes,
But if you set up an organization that's like a trade organization, whether it's Seeds or someone else, where people have standards that have to be complied with, over time, the users or consumers, through Resolve, through men having babies, through ASR, and through whoever, is going to start to say, if I want somebody reliable and ethical, this organization's stamp is necessary, like the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. So it can still have an effect, short of mass legislation. So I still think it's worth pursuing.
I would never say otherwise. Just saying it's the first thing.
It's definitely worth pursuing, and it's important because what we don't want is the government coming in and making decisions on something they know nothing about. And that's why I formed the Oregon Surrogacy Professionals Association, was to start that process in Oregon. And that's why I'm a huge proponent of SEEDS. And right now, SEEDS is, I think, doing a wonderful job. They're the closest thing we have to self-regulation or taking steps. I wish they would go faster, but I get it. It takes a while. I've been a part of some committees. It takes a while. We're all busy.
Have you ever had watched a conversation between Steve and Wendy?
Trust me, yes. Many.
It's like north and south.
Yes.
So obviously we talked about a lot of issues before the break, and what we're saying right now is that yes, there could be a bigger, market or industry now, or professional community. Things are being done. At least if there were standards, at least we've been able to, look at something and say, we don't, that's not just something we feel bad about. It's something that's against the standards. Now, so that's the first thing. That's progress. And then the second question is how is this reinforced? And this, I think, is going to be a partnership between the industry side and the intended parent side. And if we said that an agency cannot be here unless they are abiding by SEED standards, or an agency cannot be here unless if they were found to violate some of those, and there was a grievance process that determined that they're no longer part of SEEDS, we could say you're no longer part of this either. And that goes a full circle to go back to advertising, because, we facilitate a lot of that outreach to the community. So if there is, and some of you know that it's not something I'm just talking about, we're talking about specific ways to try to achieve this. If there were ways to partner that way, because we cannot create the standards for you, we can provide input, but we can help then make intended parents aware of the need and the value of only going with agencies that follow these standards.
Right, because that's the problem, is there's a gap between what we all know within the industry, like Vicki and I, like we know when we talk to people that are shopping for agencies, when we say, you're gonna be in good hands with this, this, and this one. We know that because it's a small industry. We all know each other, we all know the reputations, we know the relationships, but there's a huge education gap between what we know and what the intended parents know, and the intended parents need something more than just talking to individual people within the industry. They need something, like Steve was saying, a stamp of approval. Doctors have the medical board, lawyers have the bar association. Agencies need something like that, and right now our closest and best shot is SEEDS, and they're taking really good steps. So I think that continuing to push support for SEEDS and what they're trying to do, and continuing to push for those standards is important, and to stop being so afraid to set limitations like you're suggesting, Ron. To stop being afraid to say, guess what? If you're not living up to these standards, you're not invited to the party. Sorry. We get that you're still going to go and do your own thing, and you're still going to, screw over a lot of parents probably and surrogates, but that will come back to you. We'll figure you out in a second, but the rest of us are going to do what we need to be doing and pursuing that path. And I think that people have been really hesitant to kind of draw the line in the sand, and we need to just stop being afraid of that.
And that belies the issue related to advertising that I was talking about. Is you and Vicki know who the good players are out there, but what about you have intended parents who are caught in this sort of advertising web where people are advertising particular services that are not true, and then you have intended parents come to you and say, well, we've actually signed with this particular agency, Dr. D, and what do you think? And I'm like, well, let me tell you what I think. I don't think that you're going to be in good hands. That's the issue with the inherent danger in advertising, because you can claim anything out there, and it's a free market.
But now you'll have a tool. You'll say it's not just my own experience or opinion. They are not abiding by X, Y, Z. They have also been, there were complaints about them, and etc. Amelia, just quickly.
Yeah, a couple of points. So, as somebody who's lobbied for many, many years on the federal level, I can tell you, in my opinion, there is not really the appetite to start addressing licensing agencies. I think that would be a long haul. It's not to say we shouldn't start, but I do think it's a long haul. What I do think a smart strategy would be is to harness the energy at SEEDS on the state level. Who are the voices on the state level who can begin to dialogue with the state legislature and bring them the ABA Model Acts and bring them your standards? The New York State Department of Health did have both Model Acts, ABA Model Acts, which I think are both brilliant, brilliant pieces of guidance for all of us. And they did have the SEED standards. Now, we didn't see it necessarily trickle down into what resulted in New York regulation, but we're still working on it. Yeah. New York is still a work in progress. But it took those of us on the ground here in New York familiar with the SEED standards and familiar with the ABA 2 Model Acts to take that messaging to the Department of Health, because to be perfectly honest with you, the Department of Health doesn't know a thing about what we're doing here or what we've done for years. So find your voices at SEEDS who are your state advocates, arm them with the ABA Model Acts, arm them with the SEED standards, and get that dialogue going with the state legislature. Then maybe, if we got momentum on the state level, maybe we'd get some attention on the federal level, but I don't see that happening.
I don't think anybody here thought of the federal level.
No, John, quickly, and I just wanted to say, brilliant idea.
no, I understand. It's a state thing.
By the
I wanna
way,
make
as,
a comment.
in terms of New York, having a fairly strict licensure, I'm licensed here in New York State, and it was an arduous process many, many years ago to become licensed in the state, because there are multiple facets, and you have to send in forms and colleagues and particular types. So, but I think state licensure.
Too easy either, I gotta tell you, the lawyers have to be hurdles to cross over.
But I think state licensure is the ultimate, because
I
if
agree.
you're practicing in that particular state, that's the body that has to oversee
I
it.
think that
Just
we
much
have-
like in California, we have very, very significant restrictions as physicians in terms of what we can own, who we can refer to.
Yeah.
All of these guidelines are from California state.
But we have this brilliant body of work now that we can bring to
Yes.
our state legislature.
Yeah, we're not starting
Thanks
from
to the
zero.
work of all of you out there.
I agree. I think I'm just going to bring full circle where I think Ron is going, and I think it's a really important point. As the world of private investment money comes to surrogacy, and the older people in this room begin to say, I've been doing this long enough, I would like a way out, to have a set of standards that is in existence that they are obliged to abide by prevents the for-profit commercialization of surrogacy beyond what so many of us have worked so hard to establish for so many years from our own personal experiences. And I think that, I'm assuming that's really where you're going with all this, which is to say, this is going to happen whether we like it or not. And there's going to be the box store or the box stores. And if that's going to be the case, then if they don't have some standards in place that they must abide by, we're in trouble. And this could take huge advantage of surrogates, donors, doctors, intended parents, and children. We don't
So
want that.
there'll be box stores, there'll be boutique stores, but what we used to call best practices, and we often talked in these conferences about the fact that, we assume most of the agencies here have these best practices, so you're not going to have a surrogate that has been well screened. You're not going to have a surrogate that didn't have their own child yet. But those were all things we're assuming would be okay, because we're assuming everybody follows best practices. And what we're saying right now is best practices maybe work when everybody's passionate and, 5 minutes after they started, but over years and over different ownerships and different corporate, incarnations, the standards have to step in. So why don't we just end with, I think, one other area where I think we could make a difference along these lines is building awareness. So we talked about a minute how we can build awareness. Amelia mentioned within state legislators or Department of Health or wherever else is at the end of the day in charge of enforcing or legislating. But we have the surrogates, we have the egg donors, and we have the intended parents. And we as an organization believe that there needs to be more discourse and more education to make sure that people are aware of what's behind all these practices that we're talking about here. So the reality is that we're doing this day in, day out. Most intended parents come into this, spend a little time, and then move on. Thank God. And then most surrogates, maybe do it more than once, but once again, they do not spend enough time to try to articulate what is it that is behind this thing. How should I look at those things? So, Lisa, maybe you want to talk about the fact that when we were dealing with surrogate compensation, we were thinking that at the end of the day, it's the surrogate that need to maybe drive some of the change.
I think that surrogates in a lot of ways are the missing component there. I think so many people here have that passion, have that story that brought them there, and it's also, your job, your business. So you're going to gather that knowledge, you're going to gather that information, and I think surrogates, for in a big part, are kind of left out of that bigger dialogue because there's not as much motivation in it for surrogates. Intended parents are going through that entire process, and it's such a change for them, or a life-changing journey for them. So yes, it's inherent. That's why we have so many guys coming here tomorrow, because it's so meaningful to get that education. If we held a similar conference for surrogates to get that education, I don't think we would be filling the chairs as we do.
It's not as if we didn't try.
And so, you know, for us, it's really finding a way of bringing that education and bringing that knowledge base to surrogates, because I do think that surrogates should be their own advocate. I think they should understand what they're getting into, understand the risk, understand what that means to the journey, and have the ability to say, this is what's right for me. Not just compensation, but making sure their life insurance policy is enough to cover their family should something terrible happen, and being aware of what those risks are, what all those parts are, so they can be an effective advocate for themselves, and even coming down to picking their lawyer and knowing, yes, I have a choice, and yes, I know here's where I can go find, and here's where I know that I'm getting a good agency, a good lawyer, good providers, because it is a lot of surrogates don't come into it with that knowledge. They haven't done that research. They don't have that level of investment, so it's a missing part of that whole package.
So we need to finish soon. If anybody has like a 15-30 second closing remarks they want to suggest, if not, we will continue talking over a drink or two. Anybody wants to chime in because we can spend another minute or two if you have any closing thoughts. Okay.
Steve says no.
Steve says no. But I do want.
Say something, Ron?
Go ahead. Yeah.
For the parents in the audience, it may sound like the industry's full of a bunch of crap. There's a lot of really good agencies, a lot of good providers, well-meaning providers who do a good job. Most of them are here at this conference. We're trying to, make it safe and for everyone, and hopefully affordable in some way. But there's a lot of good people, and if you start with some of the licensed folks for recommendations, that's a good place to start. There's so much information out there, it can get overwhelming. So that's at least a way to start and start safe.
I also think, he says to me, we're going to talk about the future later.
Okay,
But
go
I do
ahead.
think that it's incumbent upon all of us to make this process more affordable, more accessible, and we all have to contribute. We have to all give back to it. We
So
all
you're
have to give
lowering your
back.
profit margin?
I'm sorry?
You're lowering your profit margin?
That's something we can discuss over a drink. But,
All right.
but no, giving back.
By donating to Men Having Babies, yes.
Well, giving back means GPAP. Giving back means, John has an idea about, having a place where those who find it difficult to afford the surrogacy journey can come to, and I think all of us have to contribute to it. So we have to give back.
So in that optimistic, on that optimistic note, we're going to conclude this, but I want to thank two of the sponsors of our evening here. So Alexis Parker, come first, and say just a couple of words about law
Just
firm.
a couple.
Yeah. There's no
I'm
mic.
up there. Hi, everybody. I have to tell you, this is like a real surreal moment for me, that I am here and then having babies and getting an opportunity to even say anything. In 2015, I was introduced to the organization. I met with Anthony. I fell in love with it. I volunteered for the GPAP grant committee, and I say that reviewing those applications each year is like the one thing I do during the workday that I don't feel like I'm neglecting work. It is the best part of my workday. It is the best part of feeling good about what I do. I'm also a parent through surrogacy, and that's kind of what got me involved in the first place, but it's not what keeps me involved. And what keeps me involved is really what everybody up here is saying. It's the good parts, it's the community, it's the mentorship. I mean, John took time out of his busy schedule visiting New York to speak to me. Rich does regularly. Amy, I mean, everybody chips in, and it's an industry that there are scary parts to it, but there's beautiful parts to it. And we all chip in and do this together, and we have places like Men Having Babies, who, we pounded the pavement together, right, to change the law. This is the stamp of approval. Be involved in a group like this, and trust the stamp of the colleagues who you can trust going forward. So thank you all for inviting me here. I just introduced my partner, Eric. He's here. Another partner, Sarah, is here too, but you can meet them over
And you
drinks.
can meet them at the expo, and Go ahead, and we have an old partner that has been, well, the company that has been part of our Friday night before the conference for many years now, EMD Surrogacy. So
I think
thank
so,
you
yes.
for
I'm sure many of you know Ruth Ceremi. She's sorry she couldn't be here this evening. So my name is Cheryl. I just want to say, if I look like I'm grinning from ear to ear, it's because, similar to what Alexis said, this is surreal, and I'm just so happy to be here in person with all of you. And a huge thank you to everyone who made this possible under these circumstances. So thank you for that. On behalf of EMD Serono, we just want to say thank you to the Men Having Babies organization for coordinating this wonderful event. From the inception of this organization, we have worked with men having babies in helping to create access and awareness for this special population. And we're so proud to be able to continue to support your mission, your outreach efforts, and obviously events such as this. I've been with EMD Serono for a little over 18 years now, and I have to say that I'm honestly so proud to work for a company that truly prioritizes patient access and feels so strongly about supporting groups such as Men Having Babies. We recognize the importance around education, needs around support and outreach, and we recognize that for gay men, there are headwinds when looking to start a family. So we're proud to be here to help support Men Having Babies, and we look forward to what I know will probably be a wildly successful 2.5 days. So thank you so much.
Thank you. So please join us for drinks and hors d'oeuvres or whatever else there's out there, and we will see you over the weekend. It's really just the beginning, and thank you for joining us.